Thank you all for tuning in to my story. As a Chicagoan, living in such a segregated city taught me that racism can only thrive if we're disconnected. So sharing our stories with one another is our way of connecting. And here's my story. So here we go. Now I'm going to read this off the paper so you guys can have some consistency as opposed to the stories feeling like the story is dragging on. So all right, here we go. I was born and raised on the west side of Chicago in the Humboldt Park neighborhood. My family was split into two factions, the haves and the have-nots. I was born to the latter. The haves were children of my grandmother's sister, who was married to a white man of privilege, giving her children all fair skin compared to ours. The two sides would meet for holiday dinners, but when both elders passed away, the relationship between the two families ended. Complexion or social status determined who among our side had the privilege to stay connected with theirs. My cousin Perry, my mother's nephew, straddled the fence between both families, as only he could. Perry was tall and slender and was as smooth as Will Smith. The haves adored Perry because he was a runner on the trading floor of the Chicago Stock Exchange, earning high commissions, driving a sports car, a real rising star. That is, until he developed a cocaine habit that shifted to alcoholism after he lost his job. It wasn't until my adult years that I would find out about Perry's past as a broker. In early May of 2012, Perry would lose his apartment and end up drifting from house to house for a month or so, eventually landing on my couch for a week. The second night of his stay, he went off on a drunken tirade, which led us into a heated argument. At the time, my tolerance was at zero because I was recovering from a gunshot wound to the face. The argument was eventually diffused, but surprisingly, that's what it took for us to have an hours-long conversation where I learned of his past as a broker and he learned of my desire for more than the streets. After the conversations we had that week, Perry offered to help me finish where he left off in the business world by connecting me with his former colleagues. This would change my life forever, but I had no idea to what extent. Prior to that conversation, I lived a life of highs and lows. In my early teens, I had been expelled from 3 different high schools for fistfights. So I got my GED and I served the streets full time. I became a part of a brotherhood of different street tribes eating together as one family, from Gangster Disciples, Black Disciples, New Breeds, Black Stones, Vice Lords, and other tribes. The mixture of different street tribes created different ways to make money and protection in case you had too much to drink and strolled in the wrong neighborhood one night. It was a life of brotherhood and loyalty that, to my shame, I would betray 2 years later. At the time, my uncle passed and his spoiled son, Anthony, was having a hard time. So to get Anthony back on his feet, I brought him in on a stain, but he ran off with the money and never paid me. I was disrespected by the audacity, but being that he was the family screw-up, I swallowed my pride and took the loss on the chin. But a month or so later, that hurt pride exploded into anger when my brothers, Kevo and B from the Brotherhood, didn't show up to report the weekly take. These are men who share the right sides of my heart, my dearest friends. We're all supposed to take the business trips together, but I decided to stay behind to fool around with some girl I barely knew. When Kevin and B didn't come back Sunday night as usual, I assumed the worst based on my experience with my cousin Anthony. I blew up their phones, but no answer. I thought they betrayed me for not going to handle business with them. When they finally answered my call 2 days later, I let my anger get the best of me and I threatened to kill them. The moment they got back in town the next morning, they showed up to my house unannounced to hold me accountable for that threat. They revealed their jail intake bags to show me they had gotten arrested over drinking in public after the business was done. So I was wrong. They didn't betray me, but I betrayed them. Instead of taking my life as they were entitled to, they exiled me instead, to live with my sins against the brothers. We took pride in conducting ourselves as gangsters, not thugs. Thugs move in the streets for glory. Gangsters do it to get their family out of poverty. And I had committed a cardinal sin against mine. I was 19 years old at the time. Left to starve, I had to go legit, but I had no skills to earn a good wage. So me and my girlfriend at the time worked like hell in low-wage jobs to keep up with the bills. As I slaved away on the assembly line every day in the blazing heat, I kept thinking there had to be a better way. I always had an idea for a movie and started Googling on how to write one out of pure desperation, trying to sell it as soon as I possibly could, if I could. I attended a seminar on screenwriting and kept following up with one of his speakers, Jim, a chipper white guy, early 50s, visiting from California, who mentored me through emails and calls. It was just a ticket out for me. But the more time Jim had me spend on writing, the more exposed I got to a world outside of the hood. For months, I ate and slept screenwriting. Feeling horribly neglected, my girlfriend at the time eventually left. So it was just me and the dream. The characters I wrote about were in business, law enforcement, and politics. So Jim had me research the industries to immerse myself in their lives, really channel the characters. But it didn't stop there. I became hungry to learn more and more about the world outside of the hood, gradually awakening. Soon I began to find social groups to network with, as Jim instructed. One introduction led to another time and time again, but I was missing something. I didn't have anything tangible to present, just ideas. So I moved back in with my parents for 6 months to save money to move to Los Angeles and become a screenwriter. When I got to their house, I pleaded with my mother to send my nephew, Trevor, mid-teens, back with his mother, my older sister, as he was causing too much trouble in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, my mother was the backwards Christian type, where the more terrible a person you are, the more you're welcome in. But if you had common sense, you're completely on your own. My father was present too, but he'd been through so many fights with her while we were growing up that he just gave up and let her have her way. This robbed me of the strong figure every black boy needs. He struggled with narcotics too, a coping mechanism for our dysfunctional household, and as well as the childhood abuses he suffered growing up. Aside from the usual fights and arguments, Trevor almost got me into 3 murders within 6 months of living there. First incident. I had a distant cousin in that area named Jacob, who I'd come to do business with while I was there. Jacob has a moderate mental disability, and Trevor would tease him in front of people for cheap laughs, which I didn't like. One night, we're dropping off Trevor and his female friend Davita to the house. As we pull up, Trevor starts making fun of Jacob, who's driving, to make DeVita laugh. From the passenger seat, I look back to Trevor with a death stare and calmly put him in his place. In the street, I was taught that disrespecting family in public shows weakness and makes you vulnerable. DeVita already makes a living by setting up guys to be robbed, and this weakness could make him the next target. Feeling embarrassed, Trevor jumps out of the car and runs through the dark driveway on the side of the house, headed toward the backyard to grab one of the many guns he stores there for me. Aware of this, I hop out and run to the trunk to get my gun. I tear open the trunk and snatch out the .38 revolver from beside the spare tire. But to my surprise, no bullets inside. At that moment, I hear Jacob shout in fright. I look over to the front driver's side and it's Trevor pointing a single-barrel shotgun to Jacob's head, then at me, shifting back and forth. I tell him, "You better fucking kill me," while gripping the .38 at my side, waiting for a chance to grab bullets from Jacob. As Trevor shifts back and forth with the shotgun, I run to the passenger side, urging Jacob to pass me the speed loader, a small device that carries a round of bullets for quick reload. As Jacob hands me the speed loader, Trevor shoves the shotgun barrel against the side of Jacob's skull, burying his head in the steering wheel, begging for his life. I immediately plug the bullets in, and as I raise to fire, Trevor bolts away with lightning speed, vanishing into the darkness of the driveway. I fired anyway. Now, I wasn't trying to hit him, but if it did, I didn't mind either. Gun empty, I bolt into the house, hide the gun in the floor vent, then strip to my shirt and boxers. So when the police come, it looks like I was asleep and disturbed by the shots like everyone else. In less than 10 minutes, a cop pounds on the door. I answer in my shirt and boxers, immediately spotting two cops in the street, waving their flashlights, looking for shell casings. Hand on his gun, the officer demands that Trevor come out, but he wasn't there. Apparently, Trevor's antics have been so disruptive in the neighborhood that neighbors automatically thought that he was the culprit behind the shots. After the police checked the house and cleared out, Trevor came back home and we went to bed like nothing happened. Second incident. One late night, I'm at the computer desk, touching up a screenplay, and the house phone rings. It's a guy from the neighborhood named Gutta, Gutta, one of DeVita's people, looking for Trevor, so he can pick up one of the guns that Trevor is storing for him. In absolute disgust and frustration, I tell him that Trevor does not run this household and that I'm shutting all that activity down. In response, Gutta makes a comment about wanting to pick up the $10,000 I have stashed instead, then hangs up the phone. This is something that Trevor must have told him after eavesdropping on my conversations. I immediately called Gutta back and asked him to repeat what he said, which he boldly did, and I told him to come get it, then hung up and waited for war. By morning, 2 hours after the house was cleared, I called Jacob up and had him guard the back door while I manned the front. Sometime later, the house phone rings. It's Gutta. He asks, "You at the crib?" I tell him, "Yup." He says, "Bet," then hangs up. With that, I walk out the front door, gun at my side, and I see Gutta running up to my porch. So like clockwork, I aim to fire, but he lifts up his shirt to show that he was unarmed, with a stupid smile, saying that he was just playing. Gun at my hip, I escorted Gutta to the backyard to collect his shotgun then sent him on his way. Third incident. On April 6, 2012, just 11 days until my departure to Los Angeles, I'm feeling great. I'm sitting on the porch outside. It's a sunny day, and I'm waiting for Jacob to pull up so we can go handle some business as usual. Typical day. When suddenly, a teenager I didn't recognize walks up on the porch and rings the doorbell. He says he's there looking for Trevor. I tell him that Trevor isn't home, and I asked him to leave a name. In response, the teen nervously stutters, which makes me look away confused. Then pow, he shoots me in the face at point blank range, then bolts from the porch. It seemed like time slowed down as the force from the gunshot hunched me to the side of my chair, and I literally thought, damn, I'm dead. Then, within that same thought, I realized I was still alive, and with bloodthirsty rage, I tore out the 40 caliber from my waist and fired back as he ran through the gateway across the street. Meanwhile, blood is surging from my mouth like a tilted pitcher of water, and children were scared, running, zigzagging through my line of fire. Fortunately, no one was hit. During my blind rage, all of my bullets went into my neighbor's car and porch across the street where the shooter ran. After emptying my clip, I went into the house to show everyone I was shot so they could call the ambulance because I couldn't talk. My mother stood there paralyzed at the sight of blood surging from my mouth as I sat down to calm my heart rate. They all were panicking too much, so I took a shirt from the ironing board, walked back outside, and sat on the porch with the shirt pressed against my face, waiting for the ambulance. At the hospital, Kevo and B, from the Brotherhood, were notified of what happened, setting aside our past differences to immediately come provide security for my family. As routine, they escorted my family to a safe location, then waited at my bedside for me to awake. I was put into a medically induced coma for a few days as they realigned my jaw and wired my mouth shut. When I finally awoke, my brother stood at my bedside with Facebook photos of the shooter for me to confirm his identity. It was him. He was in a family photo with DeVita. They're cousins. Trevor was their intended target, but killing me was a preemptive move to prevent my retaliation if they successfully killed Trevor. With their exact locations, it was my call to retaliate with a two-pointer. A two-pointer is where you have two hitters shoot up a house apiece at the same time during the cops' graveyard shift. This way you're cloaked in darkness and 911 is being flooded with calls from people half asleep, causing the cops to scramble a bit. After careful consideration, I decided not to retaliate. These weren't the typical drug houses with expendable casualties. These were civilian homes. At one location, there was DeVita's grandmother, and at the other, there was a preacher and a bunch of young kids. We were taught in the street that no matter the sin, your enemy's family is off limits. Innocent is innocent. I'll admit, the decision not to retaliate did hurt my pride. But I was able to take comfort in the fact that I had an amazing woman who I planned to settle down with. Her name was Ashley, a fiery black woman with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, dating a criminal. She showed me the peace of mind that came with being a civilian. Tailored suits for wine dinners and Little League events with family. When I was released from the hospital, my dreams of moving to Los Angeles were over. I had to break the news to all the people I had networked with, and worst of all, to Jim, that I wasn't coming. I had to think of something else, but what? I was on edge at the time. Every now and then, I hear the echoes of the gunshot that blasted me, or reach for my gun every time someone walked up too closely. My cousin Perry's arrival a month later was right on time, as I was at my worst. My PTSD from the shooting had caused me to become verbally abusive to Ashley, who eventually left, and rightfully so. I remember standing between Ashley's doorway and looking into her teary eyes that were filled with love, hurt, and the fear of giving me chance number 10 just to be hurt again. I thought since I wasn't physically abusing her, that I could say whatever I wanted when I was angry. I was easily triggered due to my pride being hurt for not retaliating. Had I killed those men, I would have never hurt Ashley. Later in life, I'd make a soul-binding commitment to protecting Black women in atonement for that. When I broke Ashley's heart for the last time, causing her to leave, I knew something had to change. And I thought maybe Perry could be the answer. Perry got a new place, but we remained in constant contact. We'd talk about all the possibilities in store for me once he opened the door to the business world. Sworn off the street life, I buried myself in the creation of a talent promotion website called the Hottest Prospects Project, or HP2 for short. Meanwhile, Perry would have me watch these Wall Street films so I would understand the language. I watched Wall Street, Trading Places, Boiler Room, American Psycho, The Associate, and others. I also listened to Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole for style, and studied YouTube clips on how to tie a tie. Soon, I began to evolve into something unrecognizable, but good. And with the HP2 website near completion, I now had a product to showcase when networking. Training wheels off, it was now time for me to meet Perry's former colleague, Andrew, a successful financial advisor living in downtown Chicago. After a brief introductory call, Andrew invited me to his office downtown for lunch. As I climbed off the bus on Michigan Avenue in a three-piece suit and holding an empty briefcase, I weaved through the sea of bustling business people, where I'm surprisingly met with warm smiles and pleasant greetings. No one was afraid of me as I passed. This was odd to me then, because just growing up in Humboldt Park, you would have, whether it's the Latino community, white people, where we would be walking on the same street and they would stop and let us walk in front of them so we wouldn't walk behind them. And that became commonplace, unfortunately. Soon, I entered the office building where I'm warmly welcomed by the clerk who checks me in and then wishes me well as I head off to the elevator and up to the 10th floor. As I sat in the lobby, I was trying to calm my nerves, because boy, was I nervous. Moments later, Andrew emerges from around the corner, straight out of the movie Wall Street. A stylish Irishman, early 40s, hair slicked back, and in a fitted suit and well-polished dress shoes. Although his spirit was humble and he warmly greeted me, I was still very much intimidated. We sat for lunch in a shop nearby, getting to know each other for a while. Moved by my creativity, he offered to help me grow as an entrepreneur, on the condition that I promised to never go back to the street life. And even if things got hairy, to always remember, brains before bullets, as a motto to keep myself in check. Andrew stood where I dreamt of being, so I looked him square in the eye and gave him my word as we firmly shook on it. From there, Andrew invited me to the Cigar Society of Chicago, a city club comprised of well-educated business people socializing over cigars and drinks. At the club, I was introduced to Brian, a public accountant, late 50s, yet very fit. Brian began to advise me on the HP2 business I started. I had the business look and walk, but Brian was the final piece, as every conversation with him was a lesson in business school. To further what I was learning from him, I would watch seminars from Stanford Business on YouTube, read articles from Business Insider, and watch Shark Tank religiously. Through Andrew and Brian, I go on to elegant dinners at prestigious social clubs. I go to opera shows and golf outings, host meetings for HP2 in the conference rooms of Fortune 500 companies, have cigars and scotch on the penthouse balcony, attend mansion parties and charity galas, the works. I had officially become something more than what society intended for me. Eventually, we would close the doors on HP2 as this business model wouldn't work. It heavily relied on advertising when advertising dollars were declining. They're up now. Back to the story. Considering this, Brian invited me out to his home in the suburbs to discuss career options over lunch. Getting ready for the hour drive to Brian's, I went to the gas station nearby to fill up. As I stand in line, gradually closing in on the counter, I noticed the newspaper that features the latest mugshots. But one mugshot gave me pause. It was a mugshot of a young boy named Malik with dreads and a barely developed goatee, arrested for murder and grinning in his mugshot. His grin said, "Yeah, I got that nigga," which hurt me because I could have been Malik so many times. If it wasn't for Andrew's brains before bullets advice and the high life experiences, I'd be in jail with the smiling mugshot too. This stayed with me during the hour-long drive. Once I arrived, Brian and I sat for lunch in his living room where he began to list off what college scholarships I qualified for, and how if I chose a career in consulting, he could float my resume around to some of the major firms in Chicago. This would secure me a corporate career and set me up for life. After lunch, Brian took me on a ride around the neighborhood to drive the point home. We drove past gated mansions surrounded by acres of land, then a high school that resembled the castle Hogwarts from Harry Potter. The point was, this could be my life if I stay the course I was just given. And as I take all of this in, I couldn't help but think about Malik. The next logical move for me to do would be to take this golden ticket out and then come back to help the community somewhere down the line. But my community was already at the precipice and needed immediate action. Record-breaking shootings, steady prison supply, and those surviving on minimum wage jobs were second-class citizens, opening doors, directing traffic, and delivering food for the privileged. All born in the wrong family like me, robbed at birth of a fair starting point, and stuck in jobs that would be lost to automation within the next 10 years. Outraged, I met with different aldermen to volunteer my time and contacts to help solve these issues. But they only wanted me to use my contacts to finance their phony photo op events. I even went to the churches, one of which in Inglewood, I was asked to sit on its community board just to be asked to use my contacts to help them raise $100,000 to build the pastor's dream church. For my last hope, I turned to humanitarian organizations, where I argue for them to get involved in these suffering communities. But the issues plaguing my community was not a priority for them. To that end, I realized it was up to me. So I respectfully declined Brian's scholarship offer and have been on the mission to save my people ever since.